did we learn that Olympia oysters are delicious. Harbor Wild Watch is a marine education organization, and we've had the pleasure to partner with many different groups in this community science effort.
Oysters are important as habitat formers, so they form habitat for other species. They're also really good at filtering water and filtering out problematic algae or toxins and things like that. And so they can help water quality as well.
As we start to see the impacts of climate change with warming water temperatures, having those large, healthy oyster populations will be a key piece to keeping our waterways healthy.
So Olympia oysters, or Olies as we call them, are our only native oyster on the west coast of the US. They have been depleted really across the west coast. In Puget Sound, the depletion really started around the time of the gold rush. And then later, habitat changes and the introduction of non-native oysters both led to further declines in the oysters. We are working to restore Olies for a number of reasons. Some is the intrinsic value of native species that we have caused a decline of. But there is also a recognition about the habitat value of native oysters. There are lots of species that utilize oyster beds. Things like coastal cutthroat trout and juvenile coho salmon will feed over those oyster beds, and so that is another reason that these are important. Outreach was always going to be a big component of this project, and that outreach took lots of different forms.
All right, friends, we're live on Facebook, so you gotta say hi to all your Facebook fans out here.
Community science is a really meaningful education opportunity. That community piece, I think, is really important because it's an accessibility to get folks involved with collecting meaningful scientific data. And then, of course, we'd like to hope that that connected piece definitely, leads them to positive action for this place as they move along through the rest of their daily lives.
Really, the focal point of the work was 5 test plots put in different habitat types from rocky to sandy, and each of those test plots was 10 by 10 feet and about 4 inches thick of Pacific oyster shell as a bed to put juvenile Olies on. They were outplanted at about that size, and then another year of growth, and then another summer of growth.
Since the low tides we need to do the fieldwork happen at different times throughout the year, this means in the summer we're out on the beach during the daytime hours, whereas in the winter those extreme low tides only occur in the dark of night.
And we put out about 1,200 Olympia oysters per test plot, and we're shocked that within months, almost all of them were gone. That led to the next part of the study, which was a predation study.
The predation part of the study was a really classic experiment to find out if our oysters were getting eaten. So we're going to have some of those protected by a cage, some oysters that are in a cage control, and then 2 different variations of kind of mimicking that 10 by 10 shell plot where oysters are just sprinkled on top, and another where those juvenile oysters are mixed into that shell hash. And of course, those oysters that were protected in those cages did much better than those that were left out in the open. The tide is low, the table is set, and so our project became a dinner bell for the lovely animals that call this place home.
The 2 most likely predators in the system based on our earlier observations were red rock crabs and raccoons. And they will eat oysters in very different ways. What we found some days was that the open cages had looked like someone had just flung the shells in a bunch of different directions, and we attribute that mostly to those raccoons and the way that they were foraging.
us watching them, you know, in a troop of 9 scurrying along the edges of the shore, flipping huge rocks. We're like, oh, you're hungry.
While the restoration failed at some level, many of the organisms that were outplanted, both during the test plots and the predation study, are still alive and growing on the beach. This was really about collecting data to help us understand, is this a viable location? And if it is, what are the things they need to consider during any potential restoration?
At some point, projects kind of go beyond the community science realm. So at least for the Olympia oyster story connection with Harbor Wild Watch, we're excited to pass the baton on to other organizations, but continue that long-term monitoring to detect potential changes in the intertidal community.